Hi everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here today, and I will be sharing with you a art journal page from start to finish. And here's a look at the page that I'll be creating today. And to create this page, I am using new stamps from Penny Black. These are called Muse, Butterfly Trio, Time, and Hydrangea, and I'll have all of the exact numbers and product names listed at the end of the video. And I'm working in my Delusions art journal, and what I'm doing here is I just want to adhere two pages together, so when I'm working I have an extra thick page on each side. So I'm putting some gel medium on this first page. And this is gel medium from Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft. And again, all the supplies will be listed at the end of the video. And I'm just applying this to this first page, and I'm going to press these two pages together. And that's going to adhere them and just make it extra thick so I don't have to worry about too much curling or warping while I'm working. And I also did that on the other side as well. Now I'm going to prime my page to get it ready for my stamping and painting, and I'm using Golden Absorbent Ground. And what this does is it actually makes the surface more porous or more paper-like, and I really like the way my watercolors look when I do this. Now you can see here that the book is bound, and so when I'm stamping on this left-hand side, I just put an acrylic block over there just to even up the surface and to get a better stamped image. I applied 2 coats of that absorbent ground, and I let that dry, and now I'm inking up my stamp with StazOn Ganache ink. And I put that tape there because I thought, oh, there's a large open area, I don't want to get any ink when I stamp it, but I forgot to remove the tape, and it looks like I didn't need to do that anyways because there wasn't any problem. So I'm just going to lift this up. Now I realized I didn't quite let that absorbent ground that I painted on there dry quite enough. I was impatient, so in the future I'll be a little more patient. But it's not essential that these are stamped perfectly because I'm going to be adding lots of other mediums on top, and you'll see here when we continue working through the page why that's just not a big deal if things don't stamp perfectly onto the book surface. So I'm using the hydrangea stamp here, and I'm using just the top part, the bud. I got a little watercolor there. I'm just wiping that up with a baby wipe. And I cut a mask, and that's from another project, and I just save it in the packaging with the stamp. And I'm just laying that down before I stamp it again. I'm using that Ganache StazOn ink. I wanted a waterproof ink so that it wouldn't bleed when I added my mediums on top of it. And with this art journal page, I'm really just stamping out the entire design first, and then I'll go back and do all my coloring. So I want to add some of those flowers over here on the left. So I have another mask that I had cut from that Muse image and saved from another project and just kept it, and I could pull it out for this page as well. And I still have that acrylic block underneath there just to help get a little bit better impression when I stamp, because I'm new in this book, so that's why there's I need that over on the left hand side. And I'll just get one more flower stamped here and remove my mask and take a look. Now I also wanted to add some leaves, and this is a little bit older stamp from Penny Black called Wondrous, but it's this great size for art journaling, just like these new stamps. So I'm using that, and I've put those masks over the hydrangeas up at the top right hand corner, and I'm just looking here for the best placement, and I'll stamp that down using the same ink as I did all of the other stamping. Now, if you like to work on your backgrounds first for your art journal, you could also stamp these images out onto watercolor paper and then color them and cut them out and add them on top of a background that was already done. But I'm kind of lazy and don't like to do a lot of fussy cutting, so this worked better for me, especially because I already had those masks ready to go. And again, I didn't let that absorbent ground dry quite well enough, so I'm just going back with pencil here, and any spots that didn't stamp well, I'm just adding a little outline with a pencil. Because I'm working in an art journal, it is a little bit harder to get a perfectly crisp stamped image, but I find that just kind of adds to the artistic effect. And I go back with a pastel pencil at the end, which I'll show, and so it really doesn't matter if things are stamped perfectly. Now to paint her face, I'm using the Shimmers Aqua Hues. These are a non-shimmering watercolor, and I find I really only need a couple of colors to do a face, and it's not too hard to paint, so don't be scared. I put Cup of Joe just where I want some shadows, and then this color is called Tan Your Hide, and while that's still wet, I'm just going back and blending that into the Cup of Joe and applying it also to the more open areas on the face. So I blended it first, and then I'm just going back and adding it onto the more open areas, but try not to completely cover everything. And that is really all that's needed to get that shaded face. So I was a little scared of painting the shading on a face, but it's actually quite easy. And I found the watercolors to be very forgiving. Now this color is called Piglet, and I'm just adding that to the cheeks, again while things are still wet, so that allows it to naturally blend. And I also put that on the lips too. And I can go in with just a little bit of water and that Cup of Joe here and do her neck and her shoulders. So I'm putting that darker Cup of Joe color and then going in, moving up into that color with the Tanier hide. And I'll have all these colors listed at the end of the video too. And just blending that out. And I'll get her arms as well. Now this girl image is made that you can really customize her. So if you wanted to add some extra stamping to her dress and paint it in, I did that on another page, you can. But today I decided just to use her very simply, which I love that as well. So you have a lot of options, and you can create more than one page by altering the image. So to paint my flowers, I'm using those same Aqua Hues Paints by Shimmers, and I've chosen just a variety of purples, blues, and pinks. I'm not doing any fancy shading with the watercoloring, basically just getting that first layer of color down. So I'm just painting them in. And this is so simple. There's no thinking involved. You can just paint and relax. And so I'll see here, I'm just showing you a few with the purple. And then I went back off camera and just painted in the rest of those flowers and the leaves. And here's a look at that once it's complete. Now to add a little extra shading, I'm using the Faber-Castell pastel pencils. And these, once you color these down, they have a bit of a chalky effect. So I'm just coloring and then blending it with my fingertip. You can see that really makes those pop. And I also did the same thing on the flowers, so colored it and then blended it with my fingertip. And I used similar colors. So if I had a blue flower there, then I used a blue pastel pencil. And then I went kind of over the centers of those, and I didn't want to have to worry about not getting any color on those. So I painted those in with some acrylic paint. Now I'm using some Distress stains, which I just put on my acrylic block to create a palette of color, and I'm adding this to the background. And the reason I switched here to the stains is that I'm going to be doing some splattering on the background, and I love the way these stains react with water. You get some light areas where the water activates with the stains. So I wanted to use these to paint the background, but you could also do that with watercolors as well. So I'm just putting that down and then going back with water to blend that out. So the most concentrated color is up closest to the flowers, and then the water is used to sort of fade that out into the white of the background. This is another medium I really liked how it looked on top of that surface that had been primed with the absorbent ground at the beginning. So the first color I added there was peeled paint, and then I'm also adding some wild honey. I did up in the left-hand corner, and I'm doing that again here next to the girl, and I also put a little bit up in the right-hand corner. So again, the most concentrated color going right up next to her, and then back with water to blend and fade that out. I like to start light and then go back and add more, just to make sure I'm liking it before I really go strong and heavy with the color onto the background. And I forgot to mention with those pastel pencils on the flowers and the leaves, you can seal those by putting a layer of gel medium over the top, but I found there was very little need to do that on this page. I wasn't getting any that was rubbing off very much, so I didn't seal mine. But you could do that with some gel medium, or at the end you could spray it with a fixative spray, a matte fixative spray like there's one from Krylon that I've used before, but I would wait till I was all done with my page to do that. Now to paint in her dress, I'm going back to the Shimmers Aqua Hues, and I'm taking that color right from the little pot. To activate those paints, you just spray them with water, let them sit for a few minutes, and then stir them up. And I'm putting the darkest color around the edges, and I'll go back and blend that with water. So similar to how I did that background. I waited to paint her dress because I just wasn't sure what color I wanted to do. So once the flowers were done, I thought I wanted a little bit more pink to tie into those flowers. Oop, and that's the forgiving thing about watercolors. If it goes where you don't want it, if you catch it soon enough, usually with just your fingertip, you can push it back where it needs to go. And there you can see I'm adding the extra water to blend things out. You can see where that primed surface also gives you just some texture to the watercolor as it dries, and I really love that. I think it just looks kind of artsy and adds some interest to the page instead of just a flat wash over the item that you're coloring. Now over the watercolor and the background with the distress stains, I'm going to add some distress ink using an ink applicator tool and a foam pad. And the first color I'm using is Rusty Hinge. So I've put that mask down. I'm starting on that masked area and then spreading that out onto the background. And this is a transparent ink, so I'm still getting some of that texture where I painted it that shows through. So wherever I put that Wild Honey, I'm also applying the Rusty Hinge color on top. I think it gave that color just a little bit more oomph in the background. Now this stamp by Penny Black is called Time, and I love it for background. So I've inked it up with Vintage Photo Distress ink. I put down my mask and then I'm just stamping that onto the background. And I decided to stamp this in those same areas where I added the Wild Honey and the Rusty Hinge painting and inking. And for me, when I'm looking at a page and it just doesn't quite look finished, I find a background stamp like this really seems to finish things off for me. Now I just wanted a little bit darker inking, especially once I saw that Vintage Photo, how that looked when it stamped that time stamp. So I'm just putting a little bit more of that Vintage Photo along the edge here. And you can see where I'm starting on the mask and then working my way off onto the page. And I felt like that sort of toned down that background stamping because it is the same color of ink that I used on the stamp. I just wanted to push that more into the background and have it recede a little bit. And again, I'm inking that on top of this stamped image as well. And then I decided to also apply that around the edges of the page. So if you're new to art journaling like me, you can see that many of your stamping techniques that you would use on a card, like applying inks around the edge, work beautifully for an art journal page too. Now, her eyes are something else I also waited to paint in until I wanted the color to tie in with the rest of the page. So I saw that I wanted to pull some of the blue from the flower onto her face. So I painted them blue, just one layer of blue paint. Now this is the smallest butterfly from the Stamp Butterfly Trio, and I've stamped it onto watercolor paper, and I'm going to use my Distress Stains to paint that in, and this is the peeled paint color, the same one I used on the background. I put the most concentrated color onto the center of the butterfly and then went back with water to blend, and I even took my fingertip and just swiped some of that water in towards the center so that the very tips of the wings were pretty pale green or almost white. And then I can pat a little bit more of that color onto the center. I cut those out, and now I'm just inking the edges with that Vintage Photo Distress ink. And now I'm going to apply them to my page. So I'm just looking for placement here, and I'll use gel medium to apply to the page. So I just paint them on the back of the butterfly, and then I stick that down wherever I want it, and apply a really light layer also on top of the butterfly. And I had just enough on my brush there I could go back and apply that on top and sort of around the edges. I didn't want to go too far though because that will start to reconstitute some of that watercolor underneath. So I was careful when I applied that gel medium on top. Now to add some splatters, I'm using the Wild Honey and a very wet brush, and I just covered up the girl because I didn't want any splatters on her face. And same here, I covered up some of those flowers and butterflies when I splattered up at the top. And once I let that dry, it really created a fun water effect there, and you can kind of see it as I'm coloring. Now, these are those pastel pencils, the same I used to shade the flowers, and I really love using these around the stamped images, especially with these stamped girls. So I just decided I kind of liked her hair white, so I never went back and painted it, and I'm just coloring with that pastel pencil and then blending it with my fingertip. And I'm also, the first color I used was gray for the hair, and then I'm going back with the brown sort of around the body and using that and just coloring and blending it with my fingertip. Very simple, but I think it gives kind of a charcoal sketched look. So instead of that looking like it was stamped, I think it looks more like I sketched it in there myself. So I'm cheating a little bit. And you don't have to do it along the total outline. You can kind of just pick certain areas where you want to do that. A little section of the dress, a little section under her chin, that all works well. This is just a mechanical pencil that I use to just give her a few little eyelashes. And then I'm grabbing back here to those pastel pencils and decided to add them onto the sort of the stem of these leaves. And just coloring and blending. If you find yours isn't blending with your fingertip, what I advise is just to press a little bit harder. You're probably not getting quite enough of the medium down to blend. And I'm back to her hair, blending a little bit more. And that's kind of what I do when I'm working. I add a little bit, go to something else, and then come back and add where I think it needs it to be. This is one of my favorite steps because I feel like it really finishes things off. Now the last thing to do is I just wanted to add a little sentiment to this. So I'm using this sentiment. I inked it with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I'm just stamping that right down onto the page and holding my breath, hoping it turns out okay. And it did, thank goodness. So here's a look at that finished page. I thank you so much for watching. I've got a few detail shots here. This one here where you can see where that distress stained and inked background reacted with the water splatters. And another look at those butterflies and flowers. And one more peek at that beautiful stamp, Muse from Penny Black. I just love that girl. So if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. You can also follow Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, and our website, which will all be linked in the description box below. And here's a complete list of all the supplies used in creating this page.